The gunshot that shattered the stillness of the Montana night sent Catherine Morrison running toward the barn with her medical bag clutched tight against her chest, her boots slipping on frost-covered ground as November wind cut through her wool shawl. She had been staying at the Turner Ranch for 3 days now, tending to the ranch owner's wife who had taken ill with pneumonia, and the sound of distress from the livestock quarters made her heart pound with a different kind of urgency than she was accustomed to in her work as a traveling nurse. The year was 1887, and out here in the wilderness 20 miles from the nearest town of Billings, every crisis felt magnified by isolation and the approaching winter that threatened to lock them all in for months. Catherine pushed open the heavy barn door and froze at the sight before her. A tall cowboy knelt in the hay beside a small calf that lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of its rib cage. The man's hat had fallen to the ground, revealing dark hair that fell across his forehead as he bent over the animal. His hands moved with surprising gentleness as he examined the calf, and Catherine could see the tension in his broad shoulders beneath his worn work shirt. "What happened?" she asked, stepping closer. The cowboy's head snapped up, and Catherine found herself looking into eyes the color of storm clouds. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble and a mouth set in a grim line. "Miss Morrison," he said, his voice rough with worry, "I did not mean to disturb you. This calf, she is dying, I think. Her mother rejected her 2 weeks ago, and I have been feeding her by hand, but tonight she took a turn for the worse." Catherine set down her bag and knelt beside him, her skirts spreading across the hay. "Let me look at her," she said softly. The cowboy moved back slightly to give her room, and she felt the heat of his body even in the cold barn air. She placed her hands on the calf's small body, feeling the racing heartbeat and the trembling that ran through the animal's frame. "What is your name?" Catherine asked as she continued her examination, her trained fingers searching for clues to the calf's condition. "James," he replied. "James Thornton. I have been working here at the Turner Ranch for 2 years now. This calf, she is special to me. Her mother nearly died giving birth, and I sat up 3 nights straight making sure they both survived. Then the mother would not nurse her, and I thought if I could just keep her alive, she would grow strong." Catherine looked up at him and saw genuine anguish in his expression. Most cowboys she had encountered in her travels across Montana territory were hardened men who viewed livestock as nothing more than property, but James Thornton clearly felt something deeper for this struggling creature. "She has a fever," Catherine said, pressing her palm against the calf's side, "and her breathing is labored. It could be pneumonia, like Mrs. Turner has, or it could be something else entirely. Animals are not my specialty, but the principles of care are similar." James leaned forward, hope flickering in his eyes. "Can you help her?" Catherine thought of all the nights she had sat with sick children and elderly patients fighting to keep them on this side of the veil between life and death. She thought of her medical training in Boston, before her father's debts had forced her to flee west and take whatever work she could find. She thought of the promise she had made to herself to use her skills to ease suffering wherever she encountered it, human or animal. "I can try," she said finally, "but I will need your help. We need to get her temperature down, and we need to keep her breathing clear. Do you have any fever medicine for cattle?" James shook his head. "Nothing that would be safe for one so young." Catherine opened her medical bag and began pulling out supplies. "Then we will use what I have in smaller doses. Willow bark tea to bring down the fever, warm compresses for her chest, and we need to keep her hydrated. If she will not drink on her own, we will have to force fluids into her a little at a time." For the next hour, Catherine and James worked side by side in the golden lamplight that pushed back the darkness of the barn. Catherine showed him how to brew the willow bark tea and let it cool to a temperature the calf could tolerate. James held the small animal's head while Catherine carefully spooned the liquid into her mouth, stroking her throat to encourage swallowing. They heated water and soaked cloths, laying them across the calf's chest and replacing them when they cooled. As they worked, James talked in a low, steady voice that seemed meant as much to calm himself as the sick calf. He told Catherine about growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, about losing his parents to scarlet fever when he was 19, about drifting north to Montana in search of work and purpose. He spoke of the satisfaction he found in working with cattle, in the simple honesty of physical labor and the quiet companionship of the other ranch hands. Catherine found herself sharing her own story in return, perhaps because the late hour and the intimacy of their shared mission loosened the usual guard she kept around her past. She told him about Boston, about her father's gambling debts and the scandal that had forced her to leave, about the freedom she had discovered in the West despite the hardship and uncertainty. She spoke of the patients she had tended in mining camps and frontier towns, of babies delivered in sod houses and broken bones set in saloons. "You are a long way from Boston," James observed, as he gently repositioned the calf to help her breathe easier. "So are you from Wyoming?" Catherine replied with a small smile. "I think that is part of the appeal of this country. We can become whoever we choose to be, regardless of where we came from." James met her eyes across the calf's small body. "And who have you chosen to be, Miss Morrison?" Catherine considered the question as she checked the calf's temperature again, pleased to find it had dropped slightly. "Someone useful," she said finally. "Someone who makes a difference, even if it is just one patient at a time, one crisis at a time." "That is a good thing to be," James said quietly. As midnight approached and then passed, the calf's condition began to stabilize. Her breathing grew less labored, and some of the terrible heat faded from her small body. Catherine prepared another dose of willow bark tea while James fetched fresh hay and spread it around the animal to keep her warm. They were both exhausted, moving with the careful deliberation of people who had pushed past the edge of ordinary tiredness into the strange clarity that comes in the deep hours of the night. "She is going to make it, I think," Catherine said, sitting back on her heels and brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. Her neat bun had come partially undone during the long night, and she was acutely aware that she must look disheveled and improper. But James's expression held only gratitude and something else she could not quite name as he looked at her. "Thanks to you," he said. "I would have lost her without your help." Catherine shook her head. "You would have found a way. You care too much to have given up." James smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face and made Catherine's breath catch unexpectedly in her chest. "Maybe so," he said, "but I'm glad I did not have to face this alone." They settled into a companionable silence, both watching the calf for any signs of distress. Catherine had intended to stay alert, to monitor the animal through the remainder of the night, but the warmth of the barn and the exhaustion in her bones conspired against her. She leaned back against a support beam, meaning only to rest her eyes for a moment, and felt sleep pulling her down like a heavy blanket. James saw her eyelids flutter closed and considered waking her, suggesting she return to the house where a proper bed waited. But she looked so peaceful sitting there in the hay, her medical bag beside her and her capable hands folded in her lap, that he could not bring himself to disturb her rest. Instead, he removed his coat and draped it carefully over her shoulders, then settled in to keep watch over both the sleeping woman and the recovering calf. As the night deepened and the temperature in the barn dropped further, James fed the small stove in the corner and checked the calf every few minutes. His eyes kept returning to Catherine's sleeping form, noting the delicate curve of her cheek and the way her lashes lay dark against her skin. He had known many women in his 26 years, but none who had impressed him quite like this Eastern nurse who knelt in barn hay without hesitation and fought for the life of an animal she had no stake in. James himself had grown up with a practical view of ranching. Cattle were a livelihood, and while they deserved decent treatment and basic care, there was little room for sentiment in the business of raising beef. But this particular calf had somehow worked her way past his defenses, and he knew it had something to do with the struggle to keep her alive in those first difficult days. He had poured so much effort into her survival that she had stopped being just another animal and had become something more precious. And now Catherine Morrison had done the same thing, dedicating hours of the night to saving a creature she had no reason to care about, simply because she had been asked for help. James found himself wondering what it would be like to have someone like her as a permanent part of his life, someone who brought that combination of competence and compassion to every situation. The thought startled him with its intensity, and he tried to push it away as foolish fancy born of exhaustion and gratitude. But the thought would not leave him entirely, and as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the cracks in the barn walls, James acknowledged to himself that something had shifted in the course of this long night. He had started the evening worried about a sick calf, and he was ending it worried about how to see more of the remarkable woman sleeping in his hay. The sound of the barn door opening made James look up sharply. Tom Turner, the ranch owner, stood in the doorway with a lamp in his hand, and surprise written across his weathered face. "James," he said, "what in the name of heaven is going on here? Is that Miss Morrison?" James stood quickly, brushing hay from his pants. "The calf took sick last night, sir," he said quietly, gesturing toward the sleeping animal. "Miss Morrison heard me in the barn and offered to help. We have been nursing the calf through the night, and she fell asleep just a few hours ago. I did not want to wake her." Tom Turner's eyebrows rose as he took in the scene, his hired hand keeping vigil over both a calf and a sleeping woman, the evidence of medical care scattered around them. "Well," he said finally, "that was right kind of her. My Sarah will want to know about this. She's been singing Miss Morrison's praises since she arrived, saying how skillful and dedicated she is. I reckon this proves it." Catherine stirred at the sound of voices, blinking awake with confusion clouding her eyes. It took her a moment to remember where she was and why, and then color flooded her cheeks as she realized she had fallen asleep in the barn with James Thornton. She scrambled to her feet, James's coat falling from her shoulders, and tried to smooth her rumpled dress and ruined hair. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice still rough with sleep, "I apologize for my appearance. The calf was very ill, and I wanted to make sure she survived the night." Tom Turner held up a hand, his expression kind. "No need to apologize, Miss Morrison. I appreciate what you have done here. James has been fretting over that little one for weeks now. How is she doing?" Catherine knelt beside the calf again, her professional demeanor reasserting itself as she examined the animal. "Much better," she reported. "The fever has broken, and her breathing is clear. She should continue to improve with rest and regular feeding." "That is good news indeed," Tom said. He glanced between Catherine and James with a speculative look that made Catherine's blush deepen. "Why do not you both come up to the house for breakfast? My Sarah will want to thank you properly, Miss Morrison and James. You look like you could use some hot coffee and food." Catherine gathered her medical supplies while James picked up his coat, and they followed Tom Turner out of the barn into the crisp November morning. The sun was just breaking over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Catherine wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and breathed in the clean air, feeling the exhaustion of the night but also a strange exhilaration. James fell into step beside her as they walked toward the main house. "Thank you again," he said softly, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "What you did means more to me than I can properly express." Catherine looked up at him, surprised by the emotion in his voice. "It was the right thing to do," she said simply. "Any decent person would have done the same." "No," James said firmly. "Most people would have gone back to bed and left me to handle it alone. You stayed, and you fought for her life like she mattered. That says something about who you are, Miss Morrison." Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the shawl or the prospect of hot breakfast. "Catherine," she said impulsively. "Please call me Catherine." A smile tugged at the corner of James's mouth. "Only if you call me James." They reached the house to find Sarah Turner already up and preparing breakfast despite her recent illness. The older woman insisted she was feeling much improved thanks to Catherine's care, and she fussed over both Catherine and James like a mother hen, pressing them into chairs at the kitchen table and filling plates with eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits. Over breakfast, the story of the night's events came out in full, and Sarah Turner clasped her hands together with obvious delight. "What a blessing that you were here, Catherine," she said warmly. And what a blessing that James cares so much for his animals. You make a fine team." Tom Turner caught his wife's eye with a look that clearly said, "Do not meddle," but Sarah ignored him cheerfully and continued to chat about the ranch and the approaching winter. Catherine learned that the Turners had no children of their own, that they ran the ranch with a small crew of hired hands, and that they had been struggling with the challenges of harsh weather and fluctuating cattle prices like every other rancher in Montana Territory. After breakfast, Catherine excused herself to change clothes and make herself presentable, and James headed back to the barn to check on the calf and begin his regular morning chores. But both of them found their thoughts returning again and again to the hours they had spent working together in the lamplight, to the easy conversation, and the sense of connection that had formed between them. Over the next few days, Catherine continued to care for Sarah Turner while also checking regularly on the calf's progress. Each visit to the barn brought another encounter with James, and they fell into the habit of talking while Catherine examined the animal, and James went about his work. Catherine learned that James had taught himself to read using an old Bible and whatever newspapers he could get his hands on, that he dreamed of someday owning his own small ranch, and that he had a gift for working with difficult horses. James discovered that Catherine had studied under some of the finest doctors in Boston, that she had a sharp wit and a love of poetry, and that beneath her professional competence lay a deep well of loneliness that mirrored his own. She spoke little of her family back east, and James sensed painful history in the careful way she avoided certain topics. On Catherine's 5th day at the Turner Ranch, Sarah Turner declared herself fully recovered and insisted she no longer needed nursing care. Catherine knew she should move on to her next patient, a prospector's wife in Billings who was expecting her first child, but she found herself reluctant to leave. She told herself it was because she wanted to ensure the calf's complete recovery, but she knew the truth was more complicated. That evening, as Catherine packed her medical bag in the small room the Turners had provided, Sarah knocked softly on the door. "May I come in, dear?" the older woman asked. "Of course," Catherine said, folding her spare dress and placing it in her traveling trunk. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and watched Catherine pack for a moment before speaking. "I hope you will not think me too forward," she said carefully, "but I have noticed the way you and James look at each other. My Tom and I, we were not much older than you two when we met, and I recognized the signs of something beginning between two people." Catherine's hands stilled on the nightgown she was folding. "Mrs. Turner, I barely know James. We have only spent a few days in each other's company." "Sometimes that is all it takes," Sarah said gently. "A few days, or even a few hours, if they are the right hours with the right person. I am not suggesting anything improper, Catherine. I just want you to know that if you wanted to stay on here for a while longer, we would be happy to have you. Winter is coming, and traveling will only get more difficult. You could stay through until spring, help me with the household, and see where things lead with James." Catherine sat down beside Sarah, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "That is very kind of you," she managed, "but I have obligations. Mrs. Patterson in Billings is depending on me." "Mrs. Patterson has a mother and 2 sisters with her," Sarah said pragmatically. "I checked with Tom, who knows her husband. She will not lack for help when her time comes. But you, my dear, when was the last time you did something just for yourself? When did you last allow yourself to want something beyond the next patient and the next town?" The question hit Catherine like a physical blow because she could not remember the answer. Since fleeing Boston 2 years ago, she had kept herself in constant motion, never staying anywhere long enough to form real attachments or face the loneliness that dogged her steps. She had told herself she was building a career, establishing a reputation as a skilled and reliable nurse, but Sarah's words forced her to acknowledge the truth. She was running. "I am afraid," Catherine admitted quietly. "What if I stay and it does not work out? What if James does not feel the same way I do? What if I let myself hope for something more and end up hurt?" Sarah took Catherine's hand in both of hers. "Those are all reasonable fears, dear. But let me ask you this. What if you leave and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? What if James is the person you have been searching for without knowing it, and you walk away because you were too afraid to take the risk?" Catherine thought of James's gentle hands on the sick calf, of his quiet strength, and the way he really listened when she spoke. She thought of how safe she had felt falling asleep in the barn, knowing he was keeping watch. She thought of the future stretching ahead of her, an endless succession of towns and patients and lonely hotel rooms, and something in her chest cracked open. "I would like to stay," she whispered. "At least for a while, if you truly do not mind having me here." Sarah Turner's face lit up with a smile that took years off her age. "Mind? My dear girl, nothing would make me happier. Now let us unpack your things properly, and tomorrow we will talk to James and see what he has to say about all this." But Catherine did not wait until tomorrow. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple behind the mountains, she wrapped herself in her warmest shawl and walked out to the barn where she knew James would be doing the evening feeding. She found him exactly where she expected, sitting in the hay beside the calf, who was now eating with good appetite and showing every sign of full recovery. "She is doing wonderfully," Catherine said from the doorway, and James looked up with a smile that made her heart skip. "She is," he agreed, standing and brushing hay from his pants. "I was thinking I should name her Catherine after the person who saved her life." Catherine laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised her with its lightness. "Please do not name a cow after me. That is hardly romantic." The word slipped out before she could stop it, and she saw James's expression shift, his eyes sharpening with attention. "Romantic," he repeated softly, taking a step toward her. "Is that how you see this, Catherine? As something that could be romantic?" Catherine's courage wavered, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "I do not know what this is," she said honestly. "But I know that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the night we spent saving this calf. I know that when Sarah said I should leave tomorrow, I felt something close to panic at the thought of not seeing you again. And I know that is probably very forward and improper of me to say. But I have discovered that life is too short and uncertain to always do what is proper." James closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, and suddenly he was standing right in front of her, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body and smell the scent of hay and leather and something essentially him. "Catherine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been trying to figure out how to ask you to stay. I have been lying awake at night trying to find the right words, the right arguments. But you are right. Life is too short for always doing what is proper or what is safe. So I'm just going to tell you the truth. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen. And if you leave tomorrow, I think a part of me will leave with you." Catherine reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his stubble under her palm and the strong line of his jaw. "Then it is a good thing I am not leaving," she said softly. "Sarah has offered to let me stay through the winter, and I have accepted. That will give us time, James. Time to see if this feeling between us is real and lasting or just the product of one intense night." "It is real," James said with certainty. "I have known that since I watched you fall asleep in the hay, exhausted from fighting to save an animal you had no reason to care about. I have known that since you looked up at me with hay in your hair and determination in your eyes, but I'm glad we will have the winter to prove it to both of us." He bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Catherine rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle and questioning, a soft press of lips that sent warmth flooding through Catherine's entire body. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a little faster, James rested his forehead against hers and smiled. "I think we should probably go back to the house before Sarah comes looking for us, Ina," he said. "But Catherine, I want you to know that I'm going to court you properly. I know I'm just a cowboy without much to offer right now, but I have been saving my wages for 2 years, and I have plans. I am going to build something worth having, something I can offer you along with my heart." "You do not need to offer me anything more than who you are, Chaltenif," Catherine said firmly. "I did not come west looking for wealth or position, James. I came looking for a place where I could be myself, where I could use my skills and make a difference. I think I may have found that place, and I know I have found the person I want to share it with." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and if Tom and Sarah Turner were not surprised to see them together, they were kind enough not to say so. Over supper that night, arrangements were made for Catherine to stay on at the ranch through the winter months. She would help Sarah with household tasks and continue to provide medical care to anyone in the area who needed it. And in exchange, she would have room and board and a small wage. But everyone at that table knew the real reason Catherine was staying, and the real reason James could not stop smiling as he passed her the potatoes and asked about her day. The winter that followed was one of the coldest on record in Montana territory, with snow falling in thick blankets that buried the ranch and forced everyone to work twice as hard just to keep the livestock fed and the buildings maintained. But for Catherine and James, the season took on an almost magical quality as they carved out time to be together amidst the demands of ranch life. James taught Catherine to ride, first on the gentlest mare in the stable, and then on increasingly spirited horses as her confidence grew. They spent precious hours exploring the snow-covered landscape, riding out to frozen streams and wind-swept plateaus where the views stretched for miles in every direction. Catherine taught James about medicine and anatomy, sharing her books and discussing the latest theories she had learned before leaving Boston. They read poetry together by lamplight and played cards with Tom and Sarah in the evenings. And slowly the awkwardness of new love gave way to the deeper comfort of real intimacy. There were challenges, of course. Catherine struggled with the physical demands of ranch life, with the endless cold and the isolation of being snowed in for weeks at a time. She missed the intellectual stimulation of the city and the variety of her traveling work. But whenever doubt crept in, she would look at James and remember why she had chosen to stay. James had his own struggles. He worried constantly about his financial situation, about whether he was good enough for a woman with Catherine's education and background. He worked himself to exhaustion trying to prove his worth, taking on extra tasks and volunteering for the most difficult jobs. It took several gentle conversations with Catherine before he began to understand that she did not measure his value in dollars and cents, that what she wanted was the man himself, not some idealized version who owned property and had money in the bank. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Tom Turner approached James with a proposal. He was getting older, he explained, and he and Sarah had been discussing the future of the ranch. They had no children to pass it to, and they had been impressed with James's dedication and skill. If James was willing, Tom would sell him a partnership in the ranch, with the understanding that James would eventually take over full ownership when Tom was ready to retire. The offer stunned James into silence. It was everything he had dreamed of. The chance to own land and build a future, but the price Tom named was more than he had saved. He was about to decline regretfully when Tom held up his hand. "Before you say no," Tom said, "you should know that Sarah and I have discussed payment terms. You have been saving your wages faithfully, and that shows character. We would accept what you have as a down payment and allow you to pay off the rest over time, out of the ranch profits. We trust you, James, and we want to see you settled here with that young woman you are courting." James felt his throat tighten with emotion as he shook Tom Turner's hand and accepted the partnership. That evening, he asked Catherine to take a walk with him after supper, and he led her to a spot near the creek where the willows were just beginning to show green buds and the air smelled of wet earth and possibility. "Catherine," he said, taking both her hands in his, "I know we have only known each other for 4 months, and maybe this is too soon, but I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Tom has offered me a partnership in the ranch, and I have accepted. I am going to build something here, something lasting, and I want to build it with you if you will have me. Will you marry me?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she looked at this man who had somehow become the center of her world. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, James Thornton. I cannot think of anything I want more." They were married in late April of 1888, in a small ceremony at the ranch with Tom and Sarah Turner as witnesses and a traveling preacher officiating. Catherine wore a simple dress of ivory silk that Sarah helped her sew, and James wore a new suit he had ordered from a catalog. And they spoke their vows under a Montana sky that stretched forever in all directions. The first year of their marriage brought all the adjustments and compromises that young couples must navigate. Catherine continued her nursing work, riding out to help neighbors with births and illnesses and injuries, while James threw himself into the work of running the ranch. They had disagreements about money and time and whose family traditions to follow, and they learned to talk through problems instead of letting resentment build. They also discovered the deep satisfaction of working together toward common goals, of building a life brick by brick through daily choices and small sacrifices. Catherine brought her organizational skills and medical knowledge to the ranch operations, helping reduce illness among the livestock and implementing better sanitation practices. James brought his steady strength and his gift for working with animals, slowly building up the herd and improving the quality of the cattle. In the spring of 1889, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled James with a fierce joy tempered by worry about the dangers of childbirth in such a remote location. But Catherine reassured him with her calm competence, and when their son was born in December of that year, she delivered him with Sarah Turner's assistance and James pacing anxiously in the next room. They named him Thomas James Thornton, after Tom Turner and his father, and the baby's arrival seemed to complete something essential in their family structure. Tom and Sarah doted on the child like grandparents, and James proved to be a devoted father who sang lullabies in a surprisingly good voice and could soothe the baby's cries with patient walking and gentle rocking. Catherine discovered that she loved being a mother, though she also struggled with the loss of independence that came with having an infant to care for. James supported her continued nursing work when she felt ready to resume it, staying home with Thomas when Catherine needed to attend to patients. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing responsibility and decision-making in ways that were unusual for their time but felt right to both of them. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Catherine and James faced new challenges and celebrated new milestones. Tom Turner's health began to decline, and more of the ranch responsibilities fell to James and Catherine. They hired additional help, young cowboys looking for work and the chance to learn the trade, and Catherine found herself helping Sarah manage the household for a growing operation. In 1892, their daughter was born, a red-faced screamer whom they named Sarah Elizabeth, and 2 years after that came another son they called William. The house that had once seemed spacious now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life, and Catherine and James learned to steal moments of intimacy and connection amidst the demands of 3 young children and a working ranch. Tom Turner passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1895, leaving the ranch entirely to James with the stipulation that Sarah could live there for as long as she wished. Sarah continued to be an integral part of their family, helping with the children and the household management, and she seemed to find purpose and joy in her role as honorary grandmother. Through it all, Catherine and James held fast to the connection they had formed that first night in the barn, when they had worked together to save a sick calf and discovered something worth saving in each other. They made time for evening walks when the children were in bed, for quiet conversations over morning coffee before the day's work began, for stolen kisses in the barn, and long looks across crowded rooms. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1898, James took Catherine back to the barn where they had first really seen each other. The calf they had saved together had long since grown into a productive cow and had been retired to a comfortable pasture where she lived out her days in peace. But the barn remained the same, still smelling of hay and leather and animal warmth. "Do you remember that night?" James asked, pulling Catherine into his arms. "Every detail," Catherine replied, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I remember thinking you were the most dedicated person I had ever met, caring so much about one small creature when you had no logical reason to invest that kind of emotion. I remember watching you fall asleep in the hay and thinking you were the bravest, most capable woman I had ever encountered," James said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I remember knowing, even then, that you were going to change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Catherine corrected softly. I was running from everything when I came to this ranch, James, running from my past and my fear and my loneliness. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to put down roots and build something real. You gave me a future worth working toward, James replied. Before you, I was just drifting, taking each day as it came without any real plan or hope. You made me want to be better, to build something meaningful, to create a legacy we could pass to our children. They stood together in the quiet barn, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built, the healthy livestock, the well-maintained building, the distant sound of their children playing in the house. 10 years had passed since that November night when a sick calf had brought them together, 10 years of hard work and joy and struggle and growth. Thank you for staying, James whispered. Thank you for taking the risk on a cowboy who had nothing to offer but his heart and his determination. Thank you for being worth the risk, Catherine replied. Thank you for showing me what love looks like when it is real and lasting and built on mutual respect. They kissed in the golden lamplight, and it felt like both a homecoming and a beginning, an acknowledgement of all they had shared and a promise of all that was yet to come. As the 19th century drew to a close and the new century dawned, the Thornton Ranch continued to prosper. James expanded operations carefully, never overreaching, but steadily building the herd and improving the land. Catherine became known throughout the region as the best nurse and midwife for 100 miles, called upon for difficult births and serious injuries, respected for her skill and her compassionate care. Their children grew strong and healthy, shaped by the values their parents modeled: hard work, kindness, respect for all living things, and the importance of family. Thomas showed his father's gift with animals and his mother's steady competence. Sarah Elizabeth inherited Catherine's quick mind and James's gentle strength. William was the dreamer of the family, always asking questions and imagining possibilities. Sarah Turner lived to see all 3 children grown and married, to hold her honorary great-grandchildren and know that the ranch she and Tom had built would continue through the family that James and Catherine had created. When she passed away peacefully in 1910 at the age of 78. The funeral drew people from across the territory, all of them with stories of her kindness and generosity. As Catherine and James entered middle age, they found new rhythms and new ways of being together. The intense passion of their early years matured into something deeper and more sustainable, a bone-deep certainty that they had chosen well and built wisely. They faced the challenges that all long marriages must weather: financial setbacks, disagreements about child rearing, the inevitable frustrations of 2 strong-willed people sharing a life. But they also experienced the profound satisfaction of watching their children thrive, of seeing the ranch become a respected operation known for quality cattle and ethical business practices, of knowing they had created something meaningful together. On difficult days when the work seemed endless and the problems insurmountable, they would remind each other of that first night in the barn, of how they had worked together to save one small life and in doing so had saved each other. Thomas took over primary ranch operations when James reached his 60s, though James continued to work alongside his son and grandsons, teaching and advising and taking quiet pride in the legacy he was passing down. Catherine continued her nursing work well into her 70s, finally retiring only when her hands grew too stiff with arthritis to handle the delicate work of stitching wounds and setting broken bones. In their retirement years, Catherine and James spent long hours on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set behind the mountains and talking about everything and nothing. They spoke of their children and grandchildren, of memories spanning decades, of the strange and wonderful path that had brought them from that November night to this peaceful evening. "Do you have any regrets?" Catherine asked one evening, her hand clasped in James's weathered grip. James considered the question seriously before shaking his head. "Not a one," he said firmly. "Every choice I made, every path I took, led me to you and to this life we built. How could I regret any of it?" "Not even the hard times," Catherine pressed. "The years when money was tight and we did not know if we would make it through, the times we fought and hurt each other. Especially not those times, James replied. The hard times taught us how strong we were together. The fights taught us how to forgive and compromise. Every challenge we faced made us better, made our marriage stronger. I would not trade a single day of it, Catherine, not even the difficult ones. Catherine smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. I feel the same way, she said softly. When I think of that frightened young woman who arrived at this ranch in 1887, running from her past and afraid to hope for a future, I barely recognize her. You helped me become someone I am proud to be. James, you gave me the courage to stay and fight for what I wanted instead of always running away. We helped each other, James said, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. That is what the best marriages do, I think. They make both people better than they would have been alone. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Two people who had spent more than 40 years learning each other's hearts and building a life that honored both their individual dreams and their shared commitment. The ranch spread out around them in the gathering darkness, solid and enduring, a testament to what could be achieved through love and partnership and stubborn determination. James Thornton died peacefully in his sleep in 1932, surrounded by his family and secure in the knowledge that everything he had worked for would continue. Catherine mourned him deeply, feeling the loss of her partner like a physical wound, but she also felt profound gratitude for the years they had shared. She lived another 5 years, long enough to see her great-grandchildren and to know that the Thornton name would be carried forward with honor. When Catherine Morrison Thornton passed away in 1937 at the age of 73, she was buried beside James on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the vast Montana sky they had both loved. At her funeral, her oldest granddaughter told the story of how her grandparents had met, of the night Catherine had helped James save a sick calf, and how that simple act of compassion had led to a love story that had shaped 3 generations. The barn where it all began still stood on the ranch property, maintained by Thomas's son and then by Thomas's grandson. Family legend held that it was lucky, that the night Catherine and James had worked together in that barn had blessed not just their marriage, but the entire ranch. Whether that was true or simply the kind of story families tell themselves to make sense of their history, no one could say for certain. But what was certain was this: 2 people had met in the most ordinary of circumstances, brought together by a sick animal and a cold November night. They had chosen to stay, to risk hoping, to build something together despite all the uncertainty and fear that might have driven them apart, and in doing so, they had created a legacy of love that endured long after they were gone, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness and the bravest leaps of faith can change everything. The story of Catherine and James Thornton became a touchstone for their descendants, a reminder that real love is built not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of working together, of choosing each other day after day, of nurturing what matters through good times and bad. It was a story of the American West in all its harsh beauty, of 2 strong people who found each other in the wilderness and built something worth having. And it all began with a sick calf, a long night, and 2 people brave enough to believe that sometimes falling asleep in the hay beside someone you barely know is the first step toward building a love that lasts forever. That was the gift Catherine and James gave to each other and to all who came after them. The knowledge that love, when it is real and fought for and treasured, can transform everything, can turn a simple ranch in Montana territory into a home filled with laughter and purpose and the kind of happiness that echoes through generations. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and parting and the inevitable passage of time. But it also never ended, living on in the children and grandchildren who carried their blood and their values, in the ranch that still bore their mark, in the lesson they taught about courage and commitment and the transformative power of choosing love over fear. Catherine Morrison and James Thornton had lived fully and loved well, and in the end, That was all anyone could hope for.